Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Always glad to be here.
Well, normally I talk about issues, but tonight I'm not. I'm going to avoid that, and I'm going to go into another subject.
Well, just when I actually had an announcement to make, you choose this night.
No, well, go ahead. Is there something you wanted to?
It's too late. You've poisoned the well. I refuse to make any statement.
All right, I'm just not going to go
I was going to make an important announcement.
Maybe the time will come for me to make one. Possibly.
Well, it's possible.
It's possible.
So, yeah,
we
will
think about that.
We could egg each other on here.
Right, maybe so. I mean, we could do that.
We could get one or both of us in real trouble here. So.
Write-in votes for something. Well, okay. So much for that. Now, right now, we've at least I think both of us have observed America, the way the country is seeking its identity, fighting its way through a lot of travail, and I have the feeling that the sense of centrifugal force in the country is greater than ever, and the sense of national identity has been weakened a lot. Now, maybe we could probe that a little bit. Do you think that, let's say, I don't know, you're an American, in 1960 you thought of yourself as an American. What did that mean, as opposed to thinking of yourself as American 60 some odd years later? Do you have any thoughts? Is there less national identity, less national pride, more disturbance over our country now than then?
Well, I've never really thought to compare ourselves in that regard today to 1960. I often compare where we are today with where we are, for instance, in the late 17 or even the mid 1700s or in the 1800s, when there was a much more marked difference there. The idea that we were mostly, and we've never been entirely, an Anglo-Saxon country. There have always been the Highland Scots, there have been Scots-Irish, there have been African Americans, there have been Native Americans, there have been Germans,
Dutch, Swedes, you name it.
Really, Germans, after Anglo-Saxons, Germans were the second biggest ethnic group in the United States as late as World War I, which of course led to some tension there once we got into that war. If you look in the 1860s, in 1862, I believe, 25% of all persons living in New York City had been born in Ireland, that not of Irish descent, had actually been born in Ireland.
Yes.
So, and yet, the melting pot idea, I think, was, with some huge exceptions, such as African Americans, was a very strong factor in making of what you would call America. Yes, newcomers were looked down on, they were ostracized, and once again, thinking of New York City, you would see signs in shops saying, now hiring, and you'd see this as late as the 1870s, the 1880s, now hiring Negroes and Irish need not apply.
Yes.
But yet there was a general melting pot aspect going on. This idea that eventually the idea of the rule of law, that the idea of mutual tolerance, at the very least we paid lip service to it, and often it went farther than that. And things are changing now, and a lot of that, I think, is due to technology. A lot of that is due to the fact that we no longer have the frontier as a safety valve, that before, if you couldn't fit into the community, if you didn't like the community and the community didn't like you, you pull up stakes, move west, move beyond where the civic order had any strong power over you, either economically or religiously or politically. The frontier's been gone now for over 100 years. This new technology that we have because of the Industrial Revolution means that you have arm's length dealing with people whom you'll never meet. For instance, who made the breakfast cereal that you had this morning? Nobody that you know. How do you know that it's safe?
Yes.
You have to rely on somebody else to tell you. So this opens the door to more government intrusion in our lives, and a lot of it is a required intrusion. We can wrestle over how much government we need, but we certainly need more than we did before the pre-industrial era. And this is happening at the same time, this requirement of governmental intrusion, if you're going to be in civilization, is happening at the same time that you can no longer run from civilization. And so people are obviously going to fight over a personal autonomy against whatever the community is, and the community doesn't know what it is anymore. It's becoming multicultural, it's becoming multi-ethnic, because the same technology can allow a vastly increased rate of immigration, of staying in touch with your ethnic roots if you come here from somewhere else. So it's what was a more unified sort of civilization 50 or 60 or 70 years ago is now a free-for-all.
Yeah, yes, well, I mean, we can say, is that good or is that bad? I mean, we have all these enormous changes, but I think one thing to say is whatever the national identity has always been a work in progress. I think we could say that. And one reason is that it's just a really weird situation that the Europeans, Western Europeans, came into possession of millions of square miles of fertile land. I mean, something unparalleled in our species history. Some unbelievable event took place with a new world. It really was many times the size of Western Europe, thousands of square miles occupied by people that were vulnerable to European power. And so they just, how do you parse that out? How do you make that work? The economic and political control mechanisms that existed in Europe, which had been hammered out for a long time, were not easily transportable here. And so there were efforts to do something. There were things going on, all the complexities of life several hundred years ago. And then finally, with difficulty, the U.S. Obtained its quote independence from quote the mother country, and it did so by allying with the traditional enemies of the mother country. So it'd be like, I don't know what maybe Texas gets independence by allying with who's our traditional, maybe North Korea. North Korea
Yes.
and Texas get together, North Koreans come in and blow stuff. I mean, so it really was a traitorous kind of event. And then after that, how do you fashion a country in this place? It's a continental Congress. It's a continent. It's thousands. It's huge. Transportation is difficult. There's no national psyche. A third of the people that were in the place in the U.S. in the time of the Revolutionary War were loyalists, a third neutral, a third wanted independence. All kinds of dislocations, all kinds of problems. A fourth of the population were basically Afro-American slaves. So it really, what are you going to do? So I think a lot of mythology was hatched out. And so what I'm talking about, I would say the national identity, people that formed the national identity of what an American was were putting a narrative together, which changed with the passage of time. But it was a really big deal. What is an American? Well, it's no longer a British subject, click. So we have our own country, click. But if you're a European American, you're superior to everyone else, including Native Americans. And also the deal was to exploit and take over the rest of the nation. So what happened with the Native Americans, there's no question that it was power against a weaker group. I mean, that's what happened. If you're a strong group and you're powerful and there's an advantage to taking something from a weaker group, then that's the normal human instinct is to do it. And that's kind of what happened. Well, just going through this complexity, what I really want to sail the ship into is each generation has a problem of coming up with whatever the mantra is for national identity. You mentioned the melting pot. The word I would choose might be gene drift. So even let's say a lot of the Irish and Italians got together. They formed families. Lots of all kinds of people were there, and they intermarried, to use that phrase. And so there was a lot of. It was impossible to say, am I Irish? Am I German? Am I Italian? Am I Greek or English? What am I? I mean, I've got relatives everywhere. So some kind of new national identity came out of that. And I think with the Afro-Americans, I think it needs to be said that there was a lot of gene drift there. So the people that came from Africa, for many reasons, the powerful male figures basically passed their genes along to their people in bondage, the females in bondage, and that's an enormous event that took place that needs to be considered. So we have this kind of huge population that's diverse, going back and forth, and then we have different immigrant populations coming in from everywhere. And what kind of national identity can we come up with? A lot of, I think, the national identity, putting something together, is having a substantial enemy. So if we have we're going to fight anybody, the Mexicans, or although not everyone wanted to, or the Japanese, or the Germans, or the Russians, or now maybe the Chinese. So, which might not be the best way to do things, but just to pick an enemy in order to stabilize the country.
Well, it certainly works short term. So, and yes, you point out something very important, that one of the natural underpinnings of the concept of statehood would be of the nation state would be that it's an ethnic nation.
Yes.
And if the United States is a nation state, which it is certainly not rooted in ethnicity. It cannot be. We've been multi-ethnic and largely multicultural since we first began. And so our statehood is once again based on this idea. You might loosely call it republicanism. The ideals, even when they are not adhered to, they are given lip service. Once again, tolerance, religious liberty, civic virtue, individualism, capitalism, and so this is the idea that when you come here, you buy into these things, and that's what makes you an American, and what makes you part of the family, if you will. So it's funny that you should mention that each generation has to come up with its own story. If you look at the two most important documents in American history, of course, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, if you look at the decades before the Civil War, the Declaration of Independence was very much part of that national story, and you have a lot of lip service paid to the idea of liberty. You have some lip service paid to the idea of equality, at least among white males. But they didn't talk about the Constitution because there was a huge fight over what the Constitution meant. And I'm referring, of course, to state sovereignty or states' rights. And often the source of that tension was over tax policy, tariff policy. And then as you get more and more into the 19th century, it was increasingly about slavery. After the war comes to an end, and by the time we're moving into the 20th century and we're facing totalitarian threats, either proclaimed as in World War I or actual as in World War II, it's suddenly the Constitution that becomes the great document that we pay attention to, because it's the idea of the rule of law, unlike these dictatorships we're fighting against. Then as we move into the Cold War period, the Bill of Rights becomes a big deal. Once again, emphasizing liberty as well as equality. So, just an interesting development there as to what we're emphasizing.
Yes, I mean, we might just parse a little bit about what it is. We mentioned a lot of the diversity that's in the country, and indeed that's touted as a positive good. But it's if you look around the world, diverse countries have lots of problems. in my opinion.
Austro-Hungarian Empire.
You have well, they're all, and even then, things weren't as mixed up. I mean, maybe cities have problems, or diverse cities, there are all kinds of tensions, but diversity itself is it's great to have different restaurants. It is. I mean, really, it's great, and it's great to be stimulated by other access to other cultures, and here's another way to do something, and so it promotes substantial intellectual abilities, and it brings forth new ideas, and you can be progressive and really go to the stars, kind of, if that would be the best part of it. The worst part of it would be that putting all these different ethnic groups together, they tend to fight with one another. And I think it's instinctive to the way that our DNA is arranged is our ethical system is centered around protecting those of the closest DNA to us. It's like something that comes out of the alligator ponds. You're going to, if you're a dog, you're going to go after cats. If you're whatever, if you take my point, going
it's
back.
It's a basic survival trait.
Well, right, and so that's and you generally protect your children before you would protect someone else. You would protect someone that looked like you and spoke the same language and had the same cultural values. With everything else being equal, and the task is to put that aside if you're trying to get some kind of balanced country here, and it's very difficult.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask, that just from a strictly genetic and evolutionary standpoint, it seems to me that the most clearly identifiable marker that you as a human being are a threat to me is different skin color. Because different skin color can physically be seen from a much greater difference from any other immediate biological or cultural differences.
Right.
Now, as you get closer in, I guess the next thing would be, vision would be the first. Your skin color is different from mine, I can see that a mile away. I guess the next one would be auditory, hearing. As you draw a little bit closer, I can hear that you either are speaking a different language or you have a different accent.
Yes.
And then when you get closer still, at least in terms of time elapsed, I can tell that you are behaving in different ways. You have cultural differences.
Yes.
Your style of dress.
Right.
For instance, a Catholic crosses himself left to right, and Orthodox crosses himself right to left.
Well, I've learned something.
Yeah, I mean, little things like that. And then, of course, if you are bowing on a prayer rug as opposed to going to Mass,
yes.
Or what have you. So, but that would explain why racism just seems to be so strong, is because the visual signs are just so much more obvious. It becomes a
indeed, this is like a tremendous possibility for the U.S., if you want to say it that way. One of the issues that took place with the way the Earth was populated is that we had populations left. So people left Mother Africa 40,000 years ago. They went into Europe. And this is being tracked down, the way the human journey around the planet happened. So you have isolated populations that have come together with different power dynamics. So a very powerful person, they have access to nuclear power, and maybe another group of people are still in a hunter-gatherer arrangement. And so putting all those people together is a real difficult task. And in the U.S., it's right on our plate there as to how we accomplish that. And it requires substantial understanding, I think, of the human condition and how we play that game, and being aware of the possibilities and also the dangers of trying to make this situation work. And I think the first thing to do, is just to understand how instinctive, you could say these are bad qualities or whatever they are, to say, well, I feel more comfortable with people that, whatever, they look like me. That's just the way it is. And that's the initial impulse. Or they like Georgia football or whatever the story. I mean, some cultural affinities. So people are more comfortable and they relate, and then the idea is that's their group, and so the idea of being in a group is very seductive, and you could even say necessary. How good and how great it is to be at a football game and cheer for your side.
Yes.
So your team scores or boo the other, whatever. There's a wonderful feeling of security when that
Yes.
happens. And in any event, so we have to understand that in our diverse country, these impulses are present and likely to be present. And the first thing I think is to say, well, yes, this is our national identity, and this is our situation. So we've got this and that, and we're all going to have to try and get along. And how do we do that? It's not an easy arrangement, is it?
Well, here's where we start projecting. We've seen where we're coming from and what we're like, and here's where we start projecting into the future. Is the answer genetic manipulation? Can we actually somehow go in and rewrite the genetic code and take out these things that up until now have been survival traits, and which, starting roughly 100 to 150 years ago with the Industrial Revolution, are now threatening not only our survival as a species, but threatening the entire ecosystem.
Well, I mean,
So-
you could changing the human central nervous system is not impossible. It's out there, and I don't think it's an immediate solution. Things could happen. There are things that could happen, but it's out there. I don't think it's in our generation. Nothing will go that way.
But say 200 years from now,
Yeah, that's certainly many things are
I
possible.
mean, CRISPR technology is
Yeah,
just
right,
made huge
CRISPR's
leaps.
all
Yeah.
kinds of things are possible, and to get 200 years in the future without blowing everyone up is quite
That's
a
the
task.
trick. That's the trick.
And so what I'm getting into is the national identity is a work in progress, and how we come up with a common definition turns out to be a big deal, and it's important to try and obtain such a definition. Now, just to talk about things that would secure that definition, one of the things is a common religion. And I think in the South, the idea of is largely, at least in days gone by, a Christian part. Most people of all ethnic groups were Christians. And that was a tremendous connection. It really was. And there may be some differences in the way that the people practice Christianity, but it was a huge, big deal. And indeed, the whole country was pretty much like that. And it was a great way to bring people together, and also sense of brotherhood, moral treatment. It was just great. And then one of the issues that's is there is as the society has become more secular, and the impact of religion, most particularly Christianity, has diminished, and other religions have appeared. It makes that bond weaker. And how do you deal with that, particularly with secularism? I mean, when people they just say, my ethical relationship with other people is there's no real reason for me to do it. I don't really have to treat people in an ethical way. I mean, Jesus is not watching me. I can just, if I don't do that, it's probably good to do it, and then the person might hit me back if I don't behave that way. But if I'm strong enough, I can really hurt the other person with no ethical penalty. I mean, say it that way, and that's a problem, isn't it? Comments?
Well, I would take issue with you on that. If you look back, a lot of studies indicate that in the American South and in America in general, that the power of Christianity has never been that universal and as strong as all that. That there was more lip service among a lot of. I mean, yes, I think more people proportionately were at least nominal Christians, but that nominal is a big word. But if you look at it, even these good Christians excluded a lot of people from the protections of Christianity. So, they're just Indians, they don't count, we can do what we want to them. They're just Africans, they're not part of the community, so we don't have to act in a Christian way towards them. As Lincoln points out in his second inaugural address, both sides prayed to the same God. and yet they still go out and kill each other wholesale.
God may know.
So, yeah.
I mean, the whole German story. Well, that's. I mean, I guess what I would say is having this. At least call it a Pantino, the Christian thing was a really good thing.
The salutary law, perhaps.
Well, I mean, it's a good thing. And so if we're facing the future, and we're going to probe national identity, that's an issue that's out there. And so just to understand, I think it's important just to say this. If we're all going to try and get along, it makes it a lot harder to do that without some compelling religious overview of human behavior.
Yes.
And so that's, and not only for us, but for the world. And so in our country, that's going to be an issue. And just to stay, that's a problem. That would be one thing. Now, you mentioned trying to, if somebody is like me, I'm going to, be easier for me to deal with them. So is there a way that our country is bringing people together in a cultural way? Are we sharing some kind of compelling culture? And I would start out by saying that, let's see, in the past, maybe everybody was aware of Shakespeare or the King James Version of the Bible, but they were aware, particularly of Western European cultural nuances, and they could share those. So if you're, if you're a politician and you quote some poetry, Elizabethan poetry or something, John Donne or whatever, I mean, it resonates with people. Mm-hmm. And because schools are inculcating a sense of common culture, and the question to ask, do we have that now? Do we have a common
I think it's fading, but I will give you a common cultural reference for you. So this is, I think, a philosophy of where we're heading according to that great, very introspective documentary known as Gilligan's Island from the 1960s.
Marianne,
yes,
is that a girlfriend for you?
That's about your style. Yes, so I'll talk to Betsy about that later on. So one of the episodes, they discovered these seeds that allowed you to read minds.
Yes.
And so they figured this is going to be great. They all start eating the seeds, and then their innermost thoughts are laid bare to everybody, all the other castaways. And they hated each other.
Yes.
And at the end, Gilligan burns up all the seeds. That was the only way they could live in peace.
Oh, really?
Prescient. I mean, this came out a few years before the beginning of ARPANET, which turned into the internet.
Yes.
But now the internet lets us, if you will, see the innermost thoughts of these people from all over the country, and of course, yes, all over the world, and to get into fights with people that we've never met, whose paths we'll never cross. And it's sort of like these mind-reading seeds. This anonymity encourages you to put your innermost thoughts out there. Somebody sees it, hates it, and attacks you viciously for it on the web. It generates far more heat than light. So the idea that we can know each other better, it's not just the diversity, it's the fact that we can see it and we can't stand it because we thought we were in that stadium pulling for the Bulldogs or whatever, and we look around and that's not the case at all. I think it makes us afraid. And now to quote that great philosopher Yoda, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. We're just jostling elbows, and we don't like.
I think that's a really germane comment. I'll make one addendum to it. One of the things that happens when the brain gets less agile and older, and dementia knocks on the door, is that people don't. They just say spontaneously what's in their mind. There's no censorship for that. And I won't make any notes about any particular prominent politicians that might just spontaneously say something, and
I can think of more than one, to be perfectly honest.
If there are a lot of them out there, but you don't. And in general, it's your intellect can stop. Maybe you've felt this way. Well, I believe I'll comment on something, and no, don't do that. Don't do that. That's there. And then when a little alcohol is there. Well, why did I say that, or whatever? But in any event, that's an important restraint is an important thing to make us get along. Well, all right, Buck, it's been good having you with us, and we'll
Indeed.
talk some more. Have you back again. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.